Hello fight fans, welcome back to my channel. I'm the MMA Girl, Jess, as usual, and welcome back to the MMA Girls space. I hope you guys had a great weekend, even though I still feel pretty damn sore about this weekend. WTF UFC edition, because WTF, literally, what is going on here? I have never seen anything so... Like, there have been a few crazy things. Hang on, let me just breathe. There have been a few crazy things that are happening in the UFC in general for quite some time now, and we can, you know, draw things way back when Imavov was called to be the backup fighter for UFC 319. That for me was the start of the ball rolling of the craziness, and obviously the WTF moments were coming, but that for me was the start of it, because that sort of got me into that whole, the UFC don't know what a number one contender is. A number one contender is someone who beats the number one contender or has a number one contender fight to become number one contender and then gets their title shot. But in the UFC right now, number one contenders don't exist anymore. In the UFC right now, we have a bunch of major weight classes. And by major, I mean the most popular ones: lightweight, welterweight, heavyweight, light heavyweight as well. Let's throw them in the mix. And featherweight's also very interesting. Bantamweight's kind of, you know what's going on. Rahab, the machine, is running the whole show. But in the other weight classes, we have a lot of questions that need to be answered, and they can often be answered by number one contender fights. However, this way around, the middleweight division are completely a mess. The light heavyweight division isn't a mess, but it's just a whole bunch of everyone we know fighting each other again and again and again. Our light heavyweight champion wanting to move up to heavyweight for a White House fight. So there's so much going on there. And then the heavyweight division is just, it is completely messed up. There's nothing going on in the heavyweight division that makes any sense. And we don't have, even after Volkov versus Jailton Almeida this weekend, I don't think the UFC know who their number one contender is anymore, because the number one contender was supposed to come out of this fight. But we now know that UFC prefer a number one contender to have precise and big finishes in their fights. But this time around, this wasn't the case at all. I saw Jailton Almeida winning that fight. He didn't get the win because he was just taking Volkov down and wasn't capitalizing on it. That is true. But the amount of control time and the amount of takedowns he scored in that fight, for me, were enough for him to win. So Volkov got the win here. But it's just the same as Gane, who got the win over Volkov the last time that Volkov and Gane fought in Abu Dhabi, and no one knew what was going on. Gane won via split decision when he should never have won that fight. He broke his foot during that fight, and the fight was horrendous. And now we're talking about Volkov being number one contender now. How is he going to be number one contender when the heavyweight champ and the number one contender that was supposed to fight on Saturday didn't get to complete their fight at all? I am completely annoyed, but I wanted to direct my anger towards Tom Aspinall at first, but then I said to myself, you got to look at the footage. The guy gets a real poke in his eye, in both eyes even, and one would say that the eye which he was not able to open after the eye poke happened wasn't the eye that got the most damage done during the eye poke. But we are not Tom Aspinall. No one is Tom Aspinall. Tom Aspinall is his own self. He's the only one who knows exactly how he feels. Of course, Dana White kind of said, without saying it, that Tom wanted to end the fight. He gave up and abandoned the fight. He threw in the towel because he was bloodied up and probably getting whooped by Gane and probably losing that round already. And I kind of want to agree with him without dissing Tom in any way, shape or form, because if he felt like he was not 100% going back into that fight and having his eye damaged would impede on his performance, then of course that is the decision I would have made as well. But that being said, Michael Bisping, I just need to say the name Michael Bisping. That should be enough for you guys as fight fans. Of course, you know what I'm talking about. That should be enough to say, why, Tom, would you not continue that fight? Because there are a lot of other fighters that have continued fights in much worse conditions. And a fellow Frenchman of Cyril's, Benoit Saint-Denis, is a great example of someone who last year got his complete eye reshaped by Renato Moicano and was stopped by the doctor, whereas he wanted to continue. Olabi, you guys remember Olabi versus Rebecca? Doctor stoppage, he didn't want to stop the fight. The only example I can relate Tom to is this year is Henry Cejudo. Henry Cejudo versus Song Yudong in April at the Apex in the main event. Henry got the eye poke, wasted all of our time, continued the fight to then actually throw in the towel in the fourth. That was very frustrating. And what Henry did was even more dirty. I'm not saying what Tom did was dirty, but what Henry did was dirty. What Tom did was just logic to him at the time. Probably his dad is in agreement with him. Andy Aspinall probably said to him, you know, if you don't feel like you can see out of this eye and you can't open the eye, then you can't see out that eye. Even if opening the eye, as the doctor was saying, the eye open looks fine. And the doctor inside the octagon said he could fight. And the doctor he consulted after his fight, which was, of course, the doctor in Abu Dhabi, said there's nothing wrong with your eye. There is no damage at all. Of course, they put band-aids on, they put bandages, etc. And he got his eye checked out. He was worried. Tom said he was more worried about his eye this time around than when he broke his leg against Curtis Blades. And that's saying something, because we didn't see much in that eye. And breaking your leg, we saw it. So it didn't seem as serious to us, the viewers, as your leg breaking was to us viewers. But that is when we have to accept that is MMA. It is unpredictable. And even though sometimes MMA can be unpredictable, and when we talk about unpredictability, we're talking only about, oh, this fight didn't go the way we thought it would. But this is unpredictable in the sense that this fight didn't even go down for the rest of the time. It was finished after less than one round because of an eye poke. Of course, Ciryl Gane, what are you doing, mate? Maybe there is a world where the UFC need to admit their gloves have a problem. But Ciryl Gane was obviously warned about the eye poking in the start of the fight. So the second time the eye poke happened and, of course, caused the end of this fight was his second eye poking escapade in this fight. So, you know, we can't blame Tom Aspinall for wanting to protect his vision and being scared for his eye, which I completely understand. But, of course, this does not mean that I am happy with his decision. Of course, no one is. I don't think anyone can say, are they happy with the outcome of that fight? No one is happy. We didn't get a conclusion as to who would have won that fight. Because in my opinion, Ciryl Gane was dominating Tom Aspinall. He was dominating him in the lightest way possible, because, of course, he wasn't hammering him, but he was getting those jabs in. He was able to connect a lot of his 1-2s, whereas Tom was having a little bit more of a difficulty landing those jabs and gauging that distance between himself and Tom. And I did remark, and I did see that during their last face-to-face, he did not capitalize on that moment to gauge a distance. Because, of course, Tom Aspinall has that famous, I'm going to put my arm on your shoulder. And he has never really explained it in full. But, of course, we get the idea that it's kind of to gauge the distance between himself, his arm distance, and his opponent, which is a cool idea. Mario Pinto, a London-based Portuguese fighter who we saw at UFC Rio recently, he does the same because he's trained with Tom Aspinall and has taken a few pointers from him. So we get it. Tom didn't do that with Ciryl Gane. I don't know why he didn't do it with Ciryl Gane. Maybe because Ciryl Gane was talking about it all week with Full Send, and Ciryl said, you know, I don't get why he's doing that, because if we need to gauge the distance, it's more likely arm to arm and not shoulder to shoulder, because he won't be able to gauge the distance properly. Whatever the case may be, maybe that's the reason why Tom said, okay, I'll scrap it for you. I'll do it for the others, but I'll scrap it for you. But that being said, with all that taken into consideration, Tom was not winning that fight. The little we did see of Tom versus Ciryl Gane, Tom was not winning that fight. And of course, I know that Tom, as we've seen in a few other fights that he's done, he lets sometimes his opponent attack him, because that ignites a fire in him that will allow him to counterattack in the most brutal way possible, and that ends the fight. So I was quite surprised with the fighting style that Tom had adopted for Ciryl Gane. I thought he would go into this fight with a bit more urgency, but I think he was recognizing that he's not facing the same competition as he usually face. And I don't think he was underestimating Ciryl Gane at all. I think justifiably he was not underestimating Ciryl Gane, as much as Ciryl Gane, of course, was not underestimating Tom Aspinall. But seeing how Ciryl Gane, of course, reacted in that octagon whilst he was crying, of course, with the decision to end the fight, he, of course, in that moment said to himself, I effed up, I put my fingers in his eyes, I shouldn't have done, and that caused this fight to finish. And I was actually ahead of this guy. Despite everything people thought about me versus Tom Aspinall, I was the one that was blooding him up and not the other way around. So for Ciryl Gane right now, he must say to himself, I could have won that fight potentially if I hadn't have poked his eyes. And so a loss of this opportunity is probably destroying him inside. It must be really hard for both guys. Tom Aspinall as well, of course, he hadn't fought in more than a year. You can get back in the cage since, of course, waiting for John Jones, starting several camps for a fight against John Jones, for then it to be cancelled or moved, delayed, and then officially cancelled when he retired. So the frustration that he has right now to have not even done a whole round with Cyril Gane for the fight to actually end that way is horrible. But that being said, if Tom Aspinall was that annoyed that this fight didn't continue because he was waiting for this fight the whole time, then he would have continued the fight. I am sure of it. I'm not saying he shouldn't have continued the fight, and I'm not saying he should have done. I'm saying that I think he would have had he been a bit more motivated to do so. And that plus the jabs he was taking to the face that bloodied his nose up, those must have been factors he used in his mind to convince himself to stop the fight. Because if he was winning that fight and he was dominating as he usually does, but just got that eye poke, he would have said to himself, nah, it's not a problem. I'm not able to open this eye very well, but the eye is functioning fully. The other eye is fine. I'll go into it. I'll finish what I've got to finish, and I'll get going. I think that would have been the scenario if he was winning that fight. But as he wasn't winning that fight, I think that has contributed to him not having the will to continue. And I think he took, if I were to say this very likely, because I like Tom Aspinall, I think he took the easy way out. What do you guys think of that? I'm not wanting to say that to be mean to him. I'm not going to be one of those fans that said, you know, he has to have continued. Why wouldn't he have continued that fight? He was not even injured. There are some guys that fight with one leg. That's true. But every person, every fighter decides to fight in the condition they decide to fight in. I've seen fighters come into fights saying they injured themselves before the fights, but they still want to fight. Some fighters obviously injure themselves during the fights, but still want to get to the end of the fight. Some fighters pay for continuing a fight because of their injury, or some fighters, despite an injury, win their fight too. So there are levels to this here. And I think that there are a lot of contributing factors as to why Tom Aspinall didn't want to continue this fight. But I think that the fact that he got a little bloodied up and injured, and that Cyril Gane was not the Cyril Gane he expected when he got into that octagon, made that decision all the more easy for him when he said to himself, I can get out of this if I say I can't continue. But if I continue now, I can't then in the second or third or fourth round say that my eye's hurting and get out of it now, because that would be a TKO victory for Cyril Gane and he'll have my belt. So this was his only opportunity to get out of it whilst retaining his belt at the same time. That's all I have to say on the matter. That's my opinion. And I think that it's all the more frustrating for us fans because this whole heavyweight division was held up so long by Jon Jones. We didn't know who the undisputed champion would be by 2025. We were waiting for this fight to clear things up in the heavyweight division, to really complete the heavyweight division as it is. And we're waiting for this evening, in particular, on the 25th of October, to tell us who was going to be number one contender and who was going to be the champion. And those two answers were not given quite easily here because, okay, the champion's still Tom, but it shouldn't be in that way. He should have completed to be the champion still, but that's how that works. No contest means the champion stays champion. But then again, our number one contender, is it really a number one contender? Is Volkov really now again the number one contender? Will he now have to compete again against either Cyril Gane or Tom Aspinall? Do we want to see a Cyril Gane versus Volkov again? Do we want to see a Tom Aspinall versus Volkov again? No, quite honestly. And the newbie in the heavyweight division, Louis Sutherland, the Englishman who debuted at UFC 321 in Abu Dhabi against Walter Walker, he didn't last long in there with Walter. Walter Walker, of course, came to his heavyweight weigh-ins with a chain with a foot on it. It's kind of Halloween themed, kind of Walter Walker themed, and it's kind of the kind of crazy we get from the Walker brothers, which I love. But Walter, of course, he promised Daniel Cormier that he would get a fourth heel hook submission in the first. And Daniel Cormier just didn't believe it. He just said to himself, nah, you're not going to get that. How are you going to get a heel hook again when your opponents are waiting for you to do that? When your opponents know that's your move, that's your thing. How could you get that again? And he did. Louis Sutherland, I'm not sure if he prepared for that. I'm not sure if he didn't see that coming, but he walked into it, literally. But congratulations to Walter Walker. That was amazing. And of course, that was potentially a new prospect. He was the LFL heavyweight champion, Louis Sutherland, and he just lost to Walter Walker, the number 14th ranked heavyweight contender in the world in the UFC, who will clearly not be letting any Louis Sutherlands into the top 15 at all. There's not a huge roster in heavyweight division in the UFC. So if you beat anyone in the top 15, then you can get into a top 5 position quite easily if you have the level to do so, because there aren't that many people in there. But that being said, that is the reason why we have such a messy division in the heavyweight division, because we have less talent, we have less choice. A lot of the heavyweights have to face each other again and again and again, and it's kind of getting annoying. But Walter Walker, his potential in the heavyweight division is huge. But I think the UFC, as Walter Walker said himself and the UFC don't want to go too quickly. They want him to build himself up. And he got this fight in the last minute because, of course, Mohammed Usman pulled out of the fight in Rio because of high testosterone levels and potential PED usage. So Walter Walker's fight in UFC's 321 card was last minute for both of them, but Walter Walker had a full camp. I'm not sure about Louis. But in any case, he's a great contender that will one day potentially compete for a belt. But for now, we don't have much going on. Hamdi Adelwahab, he had a fight against Chris Barnett on Saturday. Apart from seeing Chris Barnett's bum, I don't think anything really happened in that fight. Hamdi, of course, won that fight via UD, obviously. Chris Barnett, he has lost a bit of weight. He's gotten a bit more agile, but not enough at all. So it was not going well. This pleads the case that we still truly need some heavyweights to come into the UFC that look like and move like Cyril Gane and Tom Aspinall, because without people like them, people like Volkov who are physically fit, Gelton Almeida, who I think could move down to 205, honestly, but anyway, they're guys that are physically fit. They are physically fit visually and, of course, in terms of their cardio, their agility, their speed. I'm not saying you have to be physically a specimen like Gelton Almeida or Cyril Gane. You can be a bit more chubby. You can be whatever you like. But I think right now the UFC needs more Tom Aspinalls, needs more Cyril Ganes than they do Chris Barnett's, Hamdi Abdelwahabs or anyone like that, because they're people that don't have the physique to carry on in the later rounds or to even carry a heavyweight bout to the second round, for it to be a bout that actually is worth watching for the fans, but also that has some skill level, because I think their lack of cardio and lack of agility makes the skill level look much less. And I'm sure these guys are good in training. I'm sure these guys are great fighters, but they're not able to display that because their cardio is not there at all. And I think today in 2025, we need heavyweights that are capable of going the distance, as our champion is, as our number one contender is, as most of the top 5 are right now. But the rest are just not, they don't cut it. But that'll take time. That will take time for sure. And for now, the big question is when is the Cyril Gane versus Tom Aspinall fight getting rebooked? That is my question. I want to see when that fight's going to be rebooked, because that is a must have. And I think we need another number one contenders fight, because Volkov versus Gelton Almeida needs to go back to the drawing board with his fighting style. I want to see the Gelton Almeida that was able to submit people or able to TKO people with ground and pound because he got that position from taking them down. I don't want to see a Gelton Almeida who is unwilling to stay on the feet with Volkov because he's 6'7" and 20 pounds over Gelton Almeida's frame. I don't want to see him taking people down because he can't stay on the feet with them. That is just, take them down, okay, if you can't stay on the feet, but then do something on the ground. That is not how you fight. You can't fight with just taking people down and wanting to hug them for 25 minutes. How can you think that we as fans would enjoy that? And how do you think that that would prove you're a number one contender? We just know that you can take people down and you can stay there. But you can't even submit Volkov. Volkov's great on the ground, but that was why you couldn't submit him, because he was too good on the ground. He was getting taken down. Okay, he needs to work on his takedown defense, but then surely there is room for him to work on that. But there is room also for Gelton Almeida to work on his ground game, because he's great on the ground. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but he's not able to capitalize on the position. So get him up. We should get people up even more. I loved the reffing in this fight card. Mark Goddard, I've never got a problem with his reffing. Jason Herzog, I've not usually got a problem with his reffing at all. But I feel like at the UFC 321 card, we got some really good reffing, some great deductions of points that were necessary. And I want to see more of that. I think that's important. It's important to do. And within the Gelton Almeida versus Volkov fight, of course, Mark Goddard did stand them up, but he could have done it even more. He could have done it even more, because that would not have been a problem, and he should have maybe stood them up even more. That was for sure. Another ref would have stood them up a bit more. Other refs would have let them do a little bit more on the ground, but that's for sure something that I think the refs need to start implementing. And I'm not sure if that's because Dana White has had his word in there, or whether it's something that they've come to conclusion that they need to add to their rule book. If there's not enough activity on the ground, we stand them up straight away. I'm not sure if that's something that's being constantly modified, or whether it's something that's an actual rule still, but they've not just implemented it enough until now. I'm not sure. But in any case, good reffing at UFC 321. I've got nothing to say about that. Shout out to Quillan Soulkilled, the Australian who came in on 10 days notice, short notice from Australia to Abu Dhabi to fight Nasrat Haqparast, and he got him good in the first round. What an amazing KO was that. Of course, he deserved his 50k bonus. The other 50k bonus obviously went to Walter Walker. And fight of the night was, of course, Rebecca's fight, because every fight that Rebecca's in, there is blood and there is gore and there is a beautiful fight. So even though, of course, Ludovic Klein came out winner of that fight, Rebecca cannot be disappointed with that 50k bonus for the fight of the night. And of course, going to that decision means Rebecca doesn't get finished, didn't get submitted, didn't get KO'd. He got bloodied up, as he usually does. Last time we saw him was against Chris Duncan. I feel like he's getting a little bit too much damage every time. One fight for Rebecca is the equivalent to 10 fights for some fighters in terms of damage and blood lost, because that was really, really brutal. But amazing. I was looking forward to the undercard, honestly. I mean, looking back at it, of course, we only got decisions up until Walter Walker. Very happy for Nathaniel Wood. Underdog, got the win via UD over Jose Delgado. Very well deserved. Now he can get a ranked opponent, as he said. I need one more unranked win before I get a ranked opponent. He'll get his ranked opponent. Walter Walker, as I said earlier, great fighter, still practically undefeated with only one defeat, 15 victories to one defeat. Amazing. And as I said, Quillan Soulkilled, the kid from Australia who came in 10 days notice, blew the show away. There was nothing better than that. The whole night was mediocre compared to that. Rakic got KO'd, of course. Murzakononv won. I thought Rakic would win, but he didn't. Murzakononv was just... He looks like he punches so hard. He's going to be a problem for those light heavyweights. He's now going to be moving up to the light heavyweight top 10, and he's going to be a problem now. I'd love to see a Murzakononv face Khalil Rountree. That would be a crazy, crazy fight, and I think Khalil Rountree won't get knocked out as Rakic did, but I think Khalil will feel it, and Khalil can take those punches, but for how long? I love Khalil. I don't want to throw him to the walls either, but I know he's capable. Great news for Mackenzie Dern. Of course, I said that Mackenzie would win. Great performance from both girls. Vanna, incredible performance. Got a little tired towards the end, which was, of course, to Mackenzie Dern's advantage. Mackenzie is just an unstoppable force. She will not, I don't think, ever get tired as much as her opponents do. So very impressive from Mackenzie Dern. So overall, UFC 321 was going relatively well until the main event, of course, happened. I just feel like it was just too much. I think the build up, everything, you know, I live in France. I got the whole build up from the UFC's French media, all the French media outlets that I communicate with, all the fact that obviously I'm from England as well. So I'm seeing it all from the English part of things, of course, all the Englishmen, all the English media outlets going full ham, Tom Aspinall, and all the French outlets, of course, going full Cyril Gane, you're going to be champion. It was just so highly anticipated. And sometimes, and I feel like this happens to a lot of us, sometimes when there's something that's really highly anticipated that we cannot wait to see what happens, something has to go wrong. Something has to mess up. Something has to put a spanner in the works and delay us from knowing the outcome to this one very important thing that we wanted to know the outcome for. So very disappointed overall. I'm a fan at first, of course. I'm not going to lie and say I'm not disappointed. Tom made the right decision. I know he made the right decision for him. That is the truth. He knows, and only he knows, that he made the right decision for him. I just think that part of that decision was not purely based on the eye. But only Tom will know the real truth to that. And maybe one day he'll say what the truth is. Maybe one day he'll come clean about why he wanted to end that fight. But maybe he'll say just continuously that it was my eye and that we are not conscious enough to know what he was feeling at the time. So we can't say what Tom Aspinall maybe was thinking at the time. We can't know that. So we have to accept the outcome. We have to accept that Paramount, the new channel for UFC, will be picking up the Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane fight. And probably in the meantime, we'll get another number one contenders fight for the UFC's heavyweight title, because that number one contenders fight was not won. And then probably we'll be getting to see some new fresh blood in the heavyweight division. I hope so. It's for us to have a little bit more interesting matchups to come, because it's a tough division. And going back to number one contenders in general, why I spoke about Nasruddin Imavov earlier on in this video, and Caio Borralho, etc., because for me it was just crazy that Caio Borralho was back up for UFC 319, because I think that's why his performance at UFC Fight Night Paris was mediocre, and that he didn't go in with as much aggressivity as he usually does, which meant that Nasruddin Imavov, even though Nasruddin said he got injured during that fight and was not able to capitalize on anything, that would have meant that Nasruddin Imavov wouldn't have been the same Nasruddin in that fight. He would have had to brutalize Caio Borralho if Caio Borralho was being aggressive as he usually is in return. So the outcome of that fight, Nasruddin wins, but is he number one contender? No. So we wait until Fluffy versus RDR happens. Fluffy, of course, pulls out. Then we get Brendan Allen. So we say to ourselves, okay, the UFC probably will give RDR this title shot when, and I'm specifically saying when he beats Brendan Allen beautifully, magnificently, because we know who'll beat Brendan Allen hands down. Well, no, he threw in the towel as well. So this whole number one contenders thing, it's just BS now, because RDR is not number one contender because he's not got what it takes. Or is it just because he had the virus? Or is it because he was on 4 fights this year already? Was he tired? Was he training too hard? Was he fighting too often? Depends on the fighter, because Merab is fighting again in December. This will be his 5th title defense of the year. We've got different breeds of fighters in the UFC, in the world of MMA. It all depends on the person, and it all depends on the night, and it depends on how they feel that day in the octagon at that time. So our number one contender for the middleweight division is officially Nasruddin Imavov. If we look at the stats, because it wasn't going to be Brendan Allen if he beat RDR, but now Brendan Allen has an argument to potentially fight someone in the top 5 now, because he is in the top 5 now. So why not give him Dricus Ubesi, who does not want to fight anyone else apart from the champion? But why not try and ask Dricus to fight Brendan Allen? And Dricus will then feel on top of the world if he beats him, and is able to say to himself, now I can really officially say I'm only going to fight for the championship belt now. Why not do that? Because we don't have a number one contender unless it's Nasruddin Imavov, and Nasruddin hasn't done enough to show he's number one contender according to the UFC. So give Nasruddin his fight against Chimaev, and then we'll see what happens from there, because there's nothing else really we can do about the number one contender. There's no one else we really can call for the number one contender spot apart from Nasruddin Imavov. Anyway, that was my rant on UFC 321, on number one contenders, and on all the mess that's happened in the last few months in the UFC. As a UFC fan, as a UFC journalist, I'm baffled at everything that's been happening in the last while, and it's very interesting. But what I say in the other day is that all the ebbs and flows, the highs and lows, the mountains and the good times and the bad times, all of that contributes to a brighter future for the UFC and MMA in general, because I think that what Saturday night's fights gave us was another opportunity to see these guys fight again, because we didn't get enough of it. And also quite a few other doors can be opened, and whether or not we realize things were not going well or things were not fulfilling hopes we had, then that just leaves room for other things to be done in order to fulfill those hopes, because the hopes weren't fulfilled yet. So bad things create opportunities. Mess ups and mishaps create opportunities. And so this UFC 321 and the mess that's been going on for the last while create new opportunities at the end of the day. So I'm not mad at anything that's happened. I just hope to see the improvements that need to be made, the new fights that need to be booked, and the rematches that need to be booked as soon as possible in order to fix the problems and probably create new ones that will need to be fixed with new opportunities. And that's not a problem at all. We just need to stand by and wait patiently for all those things to go back in line and do better. In the meantime, I'll be doing a little video for UFC Fight Night Garcia versus Onama. Of course, we won't be missing out on that little fight night. So stay tuned on my channel for the rest of the week. And in the meantime, let me know what you guys thought of this weekend's fights and all the mess in general that's been going on in the UFC. Let me know so we can chat about it, and we'll see each other again in a couple of days. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and see you guys very soon. Bye.